My name was Elena. I was 38 and I worked in contract compliance. Quiet, behind-the-scenes work with records, numbers, and details most people overlooked. That night, we were sitting at the dinner table with friends when my husband laughed and said, "Her job doesn't matter, mine pays the bills." The room went silent. I felt every eye turn toward me, waiting for my reaction. My chest tightened. Heat crawled up my neck. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just smiled politely and took a sip of wine. But inside, something snapped, and something else clicked into place. I'd heard variations of this before, but never so publicly, never so cruel. I excused myself from the table, saying I needed to check on dessert. I didn't go to calm down. I went to text someone he didn't know existed. My attorney replied immediately, "Ready when you are." This wasn't new. As I stood in the kitchen, gripping my phone, I replayed other moments. Last Christmas, when his family asked about my work and he'd cut me off, nothing exciting, just paperwork. At his company party, when his boss asked what I did, she keeps herself busy. At our anniversary dinner, when I mentioned a promotion, "That's nice, honey," before changing the subject to his latest deal. I realized this wasn't a joke that went too far. It was a pattern. A deliberate erasure of my existence, my value, my contributions. He'd been training everyone around us to see me as decoration, as the woman who smiled and stayed quiet while he collected applause. I remembered the folder I'd been quietly updating for years, tucked away in my office drawer at work. My job was contract compliance for a mid-sized financial firm. I reviewed agreements, spotted discrepancies, ensured legal protections were in place. It required attention to detail, discretion, and an understanding of complex financial structures. It also paid $95,000 a year, nearly as much as his sales position. But he never asked about my salary. He never cared. I'd kept my income separate from day one, maintaining my own accounts, my own investments. He assumed I made $30,000 or $40,000 pocket money for household extras. The truth was, I'd been financially independent our entire marriage. And my work had given me access to something he desperately needed but didn't know I controlled. Information. Documentation. Proof. I rewound to the first time he'd crossed a line. 3 years into our marriage, I discovered he'd opened a credit card in my name without asking. When I confronted him, he laughed it off. "We're married. What's yours is mine, right?" I'd been furious but forgave him when he promised never to do it again. That was my mistake. I'd shown him there were no consequences for disrespecting my boundaries. He tested limits again and again, accessing my accounts, making decisions without consulting me, dismissing my concerns as overreactions. Each time, I'd absorbed the hurt and moved on. But tonight's public humiliation was different. This time, I wouldn't absorb anything. This time, there would be consequences he'd never forget. While he bragged to friends and colleagues about being the breadwinner, I documented everything. Screenshots of joint account transfers. Emails where he'd discussed major purchases without mentioning them to me. Bank records showing patterns I'd noticed months ago. I didn't confront him about the inconsistencies. I didn't demand explanations. I just collected evidence, piece by piece, building a file that told a story he didn't know was being written. Late at night, when he thought I was reading, I was reviewing statements. When he assumed I was shopping online, I was downloading transaction histories. I learned to watch, to listen, to notice what he thought I'd never see. Then one Tuesday afternoon, I noticed money moving that shouldn't be moving. Large amounts transferred to an account I didn't recognize. I found the second phone in his car on a Saturday morning. He'd gone for a run, leaving his jacket in the passenger seat. The phone slipped out when I moved the jacket to retrieve my sunglasses I'd left there. It wasn't locked, arrogant, or careless, maybe both. I scrolled through messages, my hands shaking. Affairs were mentioned, yes, but that wasn't what made my stomach drop. It was the financial discussions. Numbers that matched the mysterious transfers. Plans to move assets. References to keeping it hidden from her. He wasn't just betraying me emotionally. He was stealing from me, planning to leave me with nothing while he built a secret life. One message included account numbers that I immediately recognized from my work reviewing corporate structures. He was using shell companies. I dug deeper into our finances. Credit cards I'd never opened, carrying balances I'd never approved. A home equity line of credit taken against our house that I'd put 30% down on with my own savings. Loans with my signature forged. He hadn't just disrespected me. He'd endangered my credit, my future, my financial security. Every discovery was another layer of betrayal, another piece of evidence that this man saw me as a resource to exploit, not a partner to respect. I calculated the total damage, nearly $80,000 in debt I didn't consent to. My credit score had dropped 40 points. I was legally liable for money I'd never spent. I realized I couldn't wait for him to act. I had to move first. ID met my attorney Vanessa 6 months earlier through work. Our firm had needed outside counsel for a complex contract dispute, and she'd impressed me with her precision and strategy. We'd grabbed coffee after the case closed, and she'd casually mentioned she also handled family law. At the time, I'd filed that information away, thinking I'd never need it. But I'd kept her card. When I discovered the second phone, I'd reached out, explaining my situation in broad terms. She'd listened without judgment, then said 3 words that changed everything. Document everything. Now, standing in my kitchen while my husband entertained guests, I sent one message. I need you. Her response came in seconds, Monday morning. Bring everything. I went back to the table acting normal. Apologetic, even. I laughed at his jokes, refilled drinks, played the dutiful wife everyone expected. He relaxed immediately. His confidence returned. He reached over and squeezed my hand, a proprietary gesture that made my skin crawl. That night, as we cleaned up, he actually apologized. Sort of. I was just joking earlier, you know that, right? I smiled and said, of course. He pulled me close, relieved. He thought I'd let it go, that I'd absorbed this humiliation like all the others. He underestimated me again, the same mistake he'd been making for years. A week later, he announced he was planning another dinner party. Same group, he said. They loved it last time. The second dinner arrived. Same table, same friends, same expensive wine he'd charged to our joint account without asking. He was in peak form, telling stories, making everyone laugh. The conversation turned to careers, and I felt it coming before he opened his mouth. Well, my job keeps us comfortable, he said, leaning back in his chair. Her job doesn't really matter in the big picture. Same words. Same dismissive tone. Several guests shifted uncomfortably, remembering the tension from last time. But he didn't notice or didn't care. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out, glanced at the screen, and did something I'd planned for days. I tapped speakerphone. This is Vanessa Morrison calling for Kyle Henderson. The calm professional voice filled the room. Speaking, my husband said, his face immediately changing. The room shifted. Everyone stopped eating, stopped drinking, stopped pretending not to listen. Vanessa's voice was measured, almost bored, like she did this every day. Mr. Henderson, I'm calling on behalf of my client, Elena Henderson, regarding several urgent legal matters. I have documents that require your immediate attention. Kyle's face drained of color. He stood up quickly, knocking his chair back. This isn't a good time, he said, his voice tight. Now is fine, Vanessa replied smoothly. We need to discuss the unauthorized use of joint assets, the forged signatures on loan documents, and the offshore account you established without your wife's knowledge. The silence that followed was deafening. No one spoke. No one moved. Vanessa continued, her voice filling every corner of the room. We have bank statements showing transfers totaling $73,000 to account ending in 4782. We have copies of 3 credit applications with your wife's forged signature. We have text messages discussing asset concealment. She paused. Mr. Henderson, my client has been very thorough in her documentation. Kyle's eyes found mine across the table. I saw fear, anger, and something else, the dawning realization that he'd completely miscalculated who he was dealing with. One of our friends, Mark, slowly pulled out his phone. I saw the red recording dot appear on his screen. Others noticed too. Kyle was being preserved in digital amber, his worst moment captured for posterity. He grabbed my arm and pulled me into the kitchen, his grip too tight. What the hell are you doing? He hissed. His fear smelled like sweat and expensive cologne. I yanked my arm free and kept my voice level. I'm protecting myself from you. He tried to tower over me, to use his height as intimidation. It didn't work. You're insane, he said. This is embarrassing. You're embarrassing me. I almost laughed. I'm embarrassing you? You stole from me, Kyle. You forged my signature. You moved money into hidden accounts. And you think I'm the problem here? His face changed. The anger gave way to something calculating. You can't prove any of that, he said. I pulled out my phone and showed him the folder. Hundreds of files, organized by date. Yes, I can. His eyes scanned the screen, and I watched him realize exactly how much trouble he was in. The offshore account, I said quietly. The one in the Cayman Islands. The one you thought was untouchable because it's under a corporate structure. He went rigid. How do you... I work in contract compliance, remember? The job that doesn't matter. I smiled without warmth. I review corporate entities and offshore structures for a living. Did you really think I wouldn't recognize the pattern? Vanessa's voice came through the phone speaker, still in my hand. Mr. Henderson, that account is neither legal nor hidden. The IRS has very specific reporting requirements for offshore holdings. Requirements you haven't met. His face went from pale to gray. Kyle tried to flip the story. When we returned to the dining room, he addressed our friends with forced calm. Elena's been under a lot of stress lately. She's not thinking clearly. It was classic. Paint the woman as emotional, unstable, hysterical. Make her the problem. Several people looked uncertain, wanting to believe him because it was easier than confronting what they'd just witnessed. Then Vanessa said, I'm putting you on hold to bring in a witness. A new voice joined the call. Male, older, authoritative. This is Howard Chen from Henderson Financial Consulting. Kyle froze. Howard was his former colleague, the one who'd left the company under mysterious circumstances 2 years ago. I have documentation of Mr. Henderson's activities from 2021 to 2023, Howard said, including communications that prove his intent. Howard explained that Kyle had approached him years ago about setting up shell companies, about moving money without his wife's knowledge. Howard had refused and left the company rather than be complicit. But he'd kept copies of everything. Emails, proposals, meeting notes. I tried to warn you, Howard said, and I realized he was talking to me. I called you twice, but he always answered. I remembered those hang-up calls. Kyle had dismissed them as spam. Now I understood they'd been rescue attempts I'd never received. I'm willing to testify, Howard continued. And I've already spoken with the Financial Crimes Unit. The phrase Financial Crimes Unit changed everything. This wasn't just divorce court anymore. This was criminal. Authorities were involved. Kyle's legal exposure had just expanded exponentially. 2 days later, Kyle tried to assert control. I'd been staying with my sister, giving him space to think. He texted, "Come get your things. You need to be out by Friday." I showed the message to Vanessa. She smiled. The next morning, Kyle came home to find the locks changed. A notice taped to the door informed him that due to ongoing investigation of financial fraud involving the property, he was temporarily barred from entry. "You can't do this," he screamed into his phone when he called me. "Actually, I can," I replied calmly. "The house is in both our names, but I made the down payment. I have the canceled check from my account. The one you thought had no money in it." He tried to argue, but Vanessa had already filed emergency motions. The house wasn't his to weaponize. People said it was over. Kyle had moved in with his brother. The investigation was proceeding, and our divorce was inevitable. He went quiet on social media, stopped attending social events, kept his head down. I started to relax, thinking the worst was behind me. Then I got served papers from him. He was countersuing, claiming I'd stolen from him, that I'd manipulated finances, that I'd orchestrated everything to frame him. The accusations were wild, desperate, and completely backward. But they existed now, in legal documents, requiring responses. Some of our friends began to waver again. Maybe both sides had merit. Maybe this was complicated. I felt the old doubt creeping back. Then Vanessa called. "Read his filing carefully," she said. I heard amusement in her voice. "Then meet me tomorrow." Kyle's countersuit was reckless. In his desperation to shift blame, he'd included details he shouldn't have, dates that contradicted his earlier statements, admissions hidden in accusations, references to accounts he'd previously claimed didn't exist. He's trying to explain away evidence by providing different evidence, Vanessa explained. But the stories don't match. He just gave us ammunition. She showed me how his own filing proved he'd lied under oath in earlier depositions. He'd panicked and made everything worse. We sat in her office, and she laid out the new strategy. Every contradiction, every inconsistency, every desperate lie. His attorney is probably furious, she said. Then she smiled, really smiled. This case just became much easier. I felt something shift. He'd played his last card, and it was a joker. At the next hearing, I revealed the final document. It was an email Kyle had sent to his brother 18 months ago, discussing his plan to clear out the joint accounts before she notices. The email was detailed: which accounts, which amounts, which shell companies would receive the transfers. I'd found it on the second phone, backed up to a cloud account he'd forgotten about. His attorney's face went white when we submitted it. The judge looked at Kyle with something between disgust and disbelief. Mr. Henderson, do you want to explain this? Kyle stumbled through an answer about misunderstandings and context. It didn't help. The email was dated, time-stamped, and crystal clear in intent. His legal team requested a recess. The judge granted it, but I saw the writing on the wall. They were going to try to settle. His desperate move had backfired completely. By filing the countersuit, he'd opened doors to discovery that had previously been closed. We now had access to years of bank records, phone logs, business documents. Everything he'd tried to hide was suddenly fair game. His legal fees were mounting. His reputation was shattered. His business partners were distancing themselves. During the recess, I watched him confer frantically with his attorneys. He kept shaking his head, refusing something they were suggesting. When we returned to the courtroom, the judge asked a simple question. Mr. Henderson, did you or did you not create offshore accounts without your wife's knowledge? He couldn't say yes, that was admission of guilt. He couldn't say no, we had proof. He sat there trapped, unable to speak. Finally, he whispered, I need to speak with my client. Within days, assets were frozen. His accounts, the offshore holdings, even his business accounts pending investigation of commingling. His name appeared in a local business journal article about financial fraud investigations. No charges yet, but the damage was done. Professional contacts stopped returning calls. His gym membership was quietly canceled. His brother asked him to move out. Consequences rippled through every aspect of his life. Then, surprisingly, I received a request through Vanessa. Kyle wanted to meet privately, just us, no attorneys. I agreed to meet in a public coffee shop. He looked terrible, unshaven, dark circles, weight loss. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Then I remembered how he'd described my job as meaningless. How he'd stolen from me. How he'd planned to leave me with nothing. He started with the apology I didn't want. I underestimated you, he said quietly. I thought you'd never figure it out. That you were too trusting. I let him talk, watching his face, noting the absence of real remorse. I'm sorry, he continued. Not just for getting caught, for all of it. For how I treated you. For what I said. He looked at me with desperate eyes. Can we work something out? Without destroying everything. I set my coffee down carefully. You didn't just underestimate me, Kyle. You erased me. You made me invisible in my own marriage. You stole my money, my credit, my dignity. And you did it while telling everyone my work didn't matter. I stood up. There's nothing to work out. You made your choices. Now live with them. I walked away. 6 months later, my life looked completely different. The divorce was finalized, heavily in my favor. I'd recovered most of the stolen money, plus damages. My credit was being repaired. I'd moved into a smaller place downtown, decorated exactly how I wanted, filled with silence and peace. My career was thriving. My boss, who'd learned about the whole situation, had promoted me to senior compliance officer. The job that didn't matter turned out to matter quite a bit when word spread about how I'd uncovered financial fraud. I was offered consulting positions, speaking engagements, opportunities I'd never imagined. Friends who'd believed Kyle's narrative reached out with awkward apologies. I accepted some, declined others. Not everyone deserved access to the new life I'd built. Someone asked if I'd ever go back. I didn't even have to think about it. Kyle lost because he believed silence meant weakness. Because he mistook patience for stupidity. Because he thought the quiet woman who kept records and noticed details was too insignificant to matter. I won because I planned instead of reacted. Because I endured until I had everything I needed. Because I chose myself when the moment came. The job that didn't matter paid for my attorney. It gave me the skills to uncover his schemes. It provided the financial independence that let me walk away. Every document I'd reviewed, every contract I'd analyzed, every detail I'd noticed, all of it prepared me for the fight he didn't know was coming. My work wasn't just a job. It was my weapon, my shield, and my freedom. And now everyone knew exactly how much it mattered.